Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where in the world you're joining us from today. On behalf of the Foundation for IT Sustainability, we would like to welcome you to International Green IT Awareness Week for 2012. Thank you for joining us for this very special live presentation. We're really glad you could join us today. My name is Tim Martin. I'm a project manager with the Foundation for IT Sustainability, and I'm going to give a quick overview of today's session and also walk through some housekeeping items with you. Then I'll turn it over to our featured presenter, Rajkumar Rajendra, who will introduce himself and his topic and start the presentation. As you may know, International Green IT Awareness Week was founded and is sponsored by the Foundation for IT Sustainability, which is a global non-profit organisation. Our mission is to reduce the negative impacts of technology on the environment and promote the sustainable use of technology to help us solve environmental problems. We do this by educating individuals, corporations and government, promoting the implementation of green IT best practices, and encouraging the development of more sustainable technology alternatives. If you haven't heard of us before, please do visit us on the web at the address provided at the end of this presentation. So today we have Raj Kumar of 10,000 Trees joining us to present his topic entitled The Paper Cycle. Raj Kumar will present his material, a copy of which is available in PDF format on this session's registration page. And then we'll take some questions from the audience. We'd ask that if you do have questions, please submit them in the question panel on the GoToWebinar control panel, and we shall answer your questions at the end of the presentation. Some of you responded to my email inquiry asking for questions in advance, and we'll try to address them in the course of the presentation or in the Q&A section at the end. With that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Raj Kumar to introduce himself and his presentation for today.
Thanks, Tim, and hello, everyone. Let me just get my screen up onto full mode. Okay, hope everyone can see this.
Just waiting for it to pop up, Raj.
Okay, basically today's presentation, oh, it hasn't popped up yet, okay.
There should be a little permission box that'll pop up, Raj. When you're ready, just click yes, and then it should share your screen with the audience.
Okay. I think I've done it. Is it showing up on?
Yep, there we go. Great.
Okay, cool. Okay, my name is Raj, and I'm from 10,000 Trees. Just to give you a bit of background about 10,000 Trees first, basically what we are is a not-for-profit organization which focuses mainly on paper, and we go around educating and building awareness about the whole paper cycle, and that's what I'm going to focus on today. Basically, 10,000 Trees was formed by 10,000 Feet. What they are is a market research company, and they've been around now for about 10 years. And the owner of the company is kind of philanthropic, and he basically donates all his profits into various charities and various causes. In terms of 10,000 Trees, we've been around now for about 3 years, and we focus on getting customers who use a lot of paper and showing them how they can reduce the paper as well as offsetting the paper by planting trees for them. In terms of a mission statement, the whole idea is to build awareness and education about the community, show them how they can make it a better place, and basically try and make the world a better place. I'll go straight into our presentation, and basically in terms of the agenda, we're going to talk about the local demand of paper, the global demand of paper, the supply for it and where it comes from, and then I'll focus on cleaning up the paper cycle. And by the paper cycle, I mean from where it comes from in terms of the source, in terms of how we use it and how we can use it more effectively. We talk about the complete cycle, taking everything into consideration, and then finally recycling and getting rid of the paper that you're using. I'll also touch on how, not just about paper, but when we talk about green initiatives and stuff like that, it actually is a highly tangible CSR opportunity. And finally wrap it up by talking about how paper can be a sustainable resource and how we can actually make it a better resource in terms of what we're doing. I believe we've got a poll right now, which I think Tim will just give you a question. And the poll is basically about how much paper do you think Australians use as a whole? And we're giving you options of 50 kilograms, 100 kilograms, 150 kilograms, and 200 kilograms. I just want to get to know, what you think we're using in Australia right now. It's per capita, so what each person uses in terms of a per capita use in Australia right now per year.
So, audience members, if you've got a response to Raj's question, feel free to drop it into the chat box below with your response.
Okay. Okay, we're not allowed to use the poll session. All right.
Yeah, unfortunately the polls.
Basically, in terms of the poll's not working, yeah, I understand. No worries.
Yeah, I just got a response though.
Okay, basically we talk
from one audience member, which was 200 kilos.
Yep, I think that's getting quite close to it. Basically, paper is a proven medium of communication. We find it's quite effective. In terms of marketing, it's actually one of the best mediums to use. So we're not going to tell you, look, stop using paper. But in terms of Australian use, we use 130 million books a year, 200 million magazines a year, 1 billion newspapers annually, 3.4 billion small letters, and 300 over 1,000 large letters. So it's quite a big consumption of paper here in Australia itself. But paper in this form is not the only paper that we're actually seeing around and using. We also use things like paperboard, and you find that quite a large consumption of paper comes from there as well. The other forms would be things like your toilet paper, your tissues, your serviettes, stuff like that. By and large, printing and writing uses the largest amount. It's 41%. And second to it is, and not very far behind, is packaging and industrial usage, which is about 38%. On the whole, we're using 4.2 million tons of paper per year, and this is just in Australia. What this amounts to, and for whoever picked 200, that's very close, we're actually using 185 kilograms per person per year. And what you find is this is actually very normal. If you look at the chart on the right-hand side of the screen, that line basically shows how we actually increase our use of paper the more industrialized we get. So right on the top, we have the United States, which uses something like 330 kilograms of paper per year. Australia is the black dot just below Japan. And you find, the more industrialized, we tend to use a lot more. China, which is rapidly industrializing, is using about 50 kilograms per person. And the average Indian is using about 3 kilograms per person. What's worrying is that you find these countries have a population of 1.6 and 1.4 billion respectively, and that's growing. And they're also rapidly industrializing, especially China. I think in the next 10 years, they'll probably catch up to where a lot of industrialized countries are. So what you're going to find is the demand in terms of trees and in terms of paper products is going to go up. Globally, we're using something like 350 million tons of paper, and that's quite a sizable amount. It's reaching the unsustainable 1 million tons per day. In terms of deforestation, and basically where the paper comes from is trees, what you're going to find is about 13% of the global supply comes from tropical forests, which are illegally logged. A lot of it is in parts of Asia and in South America. Now, deforestation is at about 13 million hectares a year. That's twice the size of Tasmania that's being logged every year. Net deforestation is about 8 million. And when I say net deforestation, I'm talking about sustainable forestry that's coming up to replace deforestation of old-growth forests. So we're doing quite a lot of good things out there, and we're slowly increasing the amount of sustainable forestry out there, but right now there's not enough of it to cope with the demand that we have. From the beginning to the end of this presentation, something like 30 football fields of trees are going to be lost. And the issue with deforestation, especially if we talk about old-growth forests, is that it affects the wildlife and animals around it, as well as the communities that live around it as well. The other important impact that it does give is the reduction of CO2 absorption, because as we all know, trees absorb CO2. So we've got to basically make sure that, in terms of net deforestation, that goes down to a very sustainable level, as well as to make sure that we have enough trees for the future, because our demand for resources, not just paper and trees, but everything else is actually increasing, especially the more industrialized we get. So now what I'll go through basically the paper cycle and show you ways that you can reduce the amount of paper that you're using in the office. First of all, what you're going to know is your source. Where are you sourcing your papers from? Now, there's a couple of certifications out there, namely the FSC and PEFC, which is widely recognized as the best around. And what they're doing is it's ensuring that the paper is made from sustainable sources. So the top three up there, the FSC 100% recycled, the FSC mixed sources, which is a combination of mixed and sustainable forestry, as well as the FSC 100%, which is totally from a sustainable forest. Those are the top three labels that most environmental groups would basically recommend. If you go below that scale, you're going to see FSC mixed sources and PEFC. Both of these, what it is mixed sources where about 75% of it might come from a sustainable forest and 25% might come from an unknown source. Also, they do specify that it should come from a non-certified but sustainable forest. It's very difficult to actually manage that and police that. What most people recommend is the top three. The next two is not too bad. You can still use them. Once you go down to the ISO 14001, honestly, that doesn't actually guarantee any environmental outcomes. All it is, as with most ISO standards, is it makes sure that you've got procedures in place, that your back end, your administration is all up to date. It doesn't actually say, look, we've got to have guaranteed performance indicators. And if you've got no logo branding at all, then yeah, really question where it's coming from, find out exactly where they're getting the trees from. And I would really not use those ones at all. What you find is a lot of these trees might come from countries like Indonesia, where when they deforest trees there, it affects the local wildlife like the orangutan and even the Sumatran tiger. Last year, one of it was killed, and we've only got 400 of them left. So it comes from even areas where you find extinction is an issue, and we want to prevent that at all costs. Now, in terms of certified responsible sources, in case you do not know much about FSC and PEFC, these are the two widely recognized standards around the world. Now, the FSC was formed back in 1993. It took them a while to start things off because they really looked into policies and working with governments to come up with regulations for each country. The good thing about FSC is it also takes into account environmental groups' feedback, and they've actually got an environmental chamber that looks into what impacts are going to be made in terms of the environment and also in terms of the society, like the indigenous peoples in those forests as well. PEFC is another one. It's basically the program for endorsement of forest certification, and that started in 1999. Again, both certifications are pretty good, and I would recommend both of them. Now, what they do is they actually have standards that tailor to your local cultural, social, economic, and the political realities of each country. So you find the regulations of each country might be different. You find the forest in each country is also different because of what that forest might support. So in certain countries, you might find there's a low density of wildlife. In others, there might be a high one. Indonesia, for example, is a very high density of wildlife. So the regulations there will be different. In Australia, we have a medium density of wildlife. So again, the regulations for Australia would be slightly different again. These standards are continuously updated. In fact, PEFC is going through a whole standard revision right now. So, the best practices, the expectations of the people, expectations of governments are all taken into consideration. FSC is the one that's mainly supported by the green groups, and simply because they have that environmental chamber on the board. Basically organizations like the WWF, Greenpeace, the Australian Conservation, Planet Ark, the Wilderness Society support FSC a bit more. So do look at your certification when you buy paper and even wood products. So even if you're thinking about, building a house or construction, do look at where the wood is coming from. Wooden furniture is another example where you can look at where your certification and where your wood sources are coming from. In fact, there's a whole campaign right now by Planet Ark about using wood, simply because wood is a good product to use. And if we do use it in furniture and construction, the carbon that's stored in those materials remains in it. And if you talk about environmental impact, it's a lot better than using cement and metal as well. So, using wood is actually quite a good thing to do, as long as it's from a sustainable source. The next part of the cycle is basically about using paper. Now, I'm going to focus mainly on the use of paper within the office environment. The first tip that we're looking at is basically about a central data system or central networking system where you can keep your files electronically. What you find is if you're sharing files online, then there's a limited need to print and send things on to other colleagues. If you're looking at greeting cards, newspapers, e-catalogs, going digital and sending it around does save a lot of impact, especially if you talk about sending these cards interstate or overseas. So if you're sending a card, from Australia to America, you got to think of the concern of transportation, the environmental impact of that whole cycle, and not just of printing that piece of paper as well. Use paperless meetings, using your laptops, projectors, saves a lot of paper. Often you find in meetings, the presenter might come in and give each one a copy of his presentation, which after the presentation, most people would then dump into either the bin or the recycling bin, hopefully the recycling bin. So you find, what they're printing is of limited use. I've been to a government council meeting where they were talking about improving the environmental footprint, and each department came up with suggestions, and they printed out a 30-page report for each department for everyone that attended. And you find most people are not even going to read that report, and they prefer like a summary. So think of the impact of that as well. The second thing is think before you print a copy. Minimize the printing of emails. A lot of people print emails, they file it, they store it somewhere, and it takes up space, and a lot of them don't even refer back to it. So if you're printing emails, make sure there's a reason for it. If you can back up your files electronically, then it's always there. I know some people have a fear that, if they don't print the email, then they might lose it if something happens to the system. So if you've got backup systems where it's not just on the computer but on a network, then that feeling that they need to print emails and stuff to keep would actually be lowered. Use the print preview feature before printing. Make sure that that's the way that you want to print it. Very important to spell check, proofread it, because what you find is often we make mistakes and then we got to reprint it again. Now, if it's a big job, especially if you're printing copies for the whole office, print the sample first. Make sure that that's exactly what you want before you print the whole job. That way, you don't have to print the whole again, and it's not going to save the amount of paper that you use, but in terms of cost, that reduces the cost that the company has to pay for it as well. Now, today, most printers have the duplex capability, but unfortunately, not all offices have duplex-capable printers, and that's something that we should be looking into and set the computer to default printing as well. So if someone wants to print single-sided, they have to make that option, but automatically it should be a default option for everyone. So that way, you're actually saving 50% of the paper that you're using. If you're using 10 reams of paper a year, that automatically cuts it down to 5 reams. In terms of the cost savings, that can be quite big as well. Print multiple pages on a single sheet. This is really good for presentations, PowerPoint slides, or design slides where people don't need to focus on everything in such detail. Then why not have multiple pages in it? The other thing is once you've got blank sides of paper, use it for drafts. Use it as a scrap paper. You can even use it to print a draft of whatever copies that you have to make sure that it's all okay. One thing that's quite important is copy maintenance. What you find is that prevents the paper jams, and it actually improves the efficiency of the printer as well, and reduces your cost. One thing you can also look at is into buying new copiers. If you've got a very old printer or copier, look at buying a new one. What you find is the energy consumption of the newer printers is actually quite low compared to the older ones. And in terms of efficiency, it's also a lot higher. So if you look at your entire environmental footprint, that really helps quite a bit. Reduce business junk mail. Now this affects quite a lot of businesses, especially those that have mailing lists and they send out mail to customers. Now if you remove the redundant addresses and companies that shouldn't be on a database, one is you're saving on the printing. Two, you're not irritating customers as well. And three, at least your mail is well targeted, because the last thing you want is to send a business mail to people that don't need your service or don't want your service. And it does improve your image as well. If you're on the mailing list and you don't want to be unsubscribed, I know people who receive magazines and stuff which they do not read and never bother canceling it. And you find there's a resource out there that's being used that has no purpose. Request electronic mail and bills. What we find is bills and mail of that nature really should be sent electronically, because it's not just about printing the paper. You got to think about the stamps that they're using, the transport that they're using, and everything else just for 1 or 2 sheets of paper. So you find electronically that has a much lower environmental footprint as well. Switch from disposables to reusables. Basically, in the office, if you're using paper cups, get a mug. Some people use plastic cups, which is even worse because the recycling capability of that is even lower. Use rags instead of paper towels, and so forth. So anything where you're finding you're using it once and throwing it away, think, is there a way that I can use something else that I can keep on reusing and lower the impact? Educate your organization is very important, because if you're going to implement something, you've got to make sure that people have an understanding of why you're doing it. It's also a two-way sort of scenario. When you talk about coming up with principles or policies about the environment, make sure you get their feedback as well. The last thing you want to do is implement something that actually would disadvantage someone. Sometimes you find some people might need to use it in a certain way, and obviously business has to come first. So get their concerns in and find out exactly how the principles will affect them as well. And sometimes what might work for one department might not work for all the departments. You find certain departments might use printing more often than others, or certain departments might find it easier to cut down the amount of paper that they're using than other departments might be. So always get their feedback. The best way is to get them to make suggestions as to how to reduce their paper use, or any environmental concern that you have. Get them to make the suggestions, so it's not just a top-down approach. You're getting feedback from them, and you find if you get feedback from them and it's their initiatives, it works a lot better in the office as well. Now, things that you can do in the office is track and monitor what's being used by different departments, by different individuals, and you can even have a competition, to see who's improving. Incentives always work very well in this sort of things. Print more words on each page. Use smaller fonts. Decrease the page margins, and you find you can print a lot more stuff on less paper. Now, the other thing you can look at is page efficient fonts. What we found is Times New Roman, Arial, and Calibri are one of the best fonts to use. And you can always play around with them and find out, which ones would save you a bit of space, but still remain visible and readable. Now, I find a lot of people printing web pages as well, and sometimes it's stuff that they don't need. If you actually bookmark the web pages, then you know exactly where it is and can refer to it anytime you want to. The other thing is, if you really do need to print a web page, look for the printer-friendly versions. I don't think any one of us wants to find that we're printing out all these advertisements that we don't really want to read anyway. So remove all the ads, and you find that takes up quite a bit of space. And any graphics that you don't need out of the web page. Sometimes what you can do is even cut and paste it, what necessary information you want, onto a Word document, and then just print that out. so you combine several web pages of what you're looking for as well. Give it a second chance. The whole thing is about how can we reuse things instead of having it going to waste. So if you're talking about boxes, folders, envelopes, yeah, store it somewhere till you might have a further use of it, rather than throwing it away and then 3 months down the road figuring out how, yeah, we need a whole bunch of boxes and buying new boxes. Save and reuse scrap paper. This one really is something that all of us can do. So if you're printing out stuff single-sided, or you get documents from other people that are single-sided, use the reverse side for fax paper, or use it for printing of drafts, or use it in meetings to take down notes and stuff like that. So there's a lot of uses for the other side of the paper. Don't just recycle it straight away. Reuse it first and then recycle it. And the last point there is about the weight of the paper, the GSM. What you find is most copy paper is 80 GSM, and I would recommend that we use that. But when it comes to like printing and producing brochures and catalogs, often people go with much thicker versions, and sometimes they choose up to 350 to 400 GSM. Just have to think about, do I need that sort of thickness? Can I do with half that GSM and still get the message across? Because every time you reduce that GSM, you're reducing the amount of paper that we use. Now, when we look about reducing paper, we have to look at the complete cycle. What are the alternatives? Most of the 10 tips that, what I'm trying to say is a lot of it is unnecessary use, and we should reduce the unnecessary use of paper. But if it is going to be that I'm going to use some other medium instead of this paper, then you got to think, is that other medium going to be more effective or more environmentally friendly? I'll give you an example. If you're talking about billing and switching from paper billing to electronic billing, what you find is the environmental impact of electronic billing is actually less, because you're taking away the transport, you're taking away basically the whole printing cycle of that. And people are going to basically be reading a bill on their emails anyway, which the laptops are going to be on for that. But if you talk about a book, now printing anything around 200 odd pages or more is actually better than doing it or reading it electronically. What you find is with something that's more than 200 pages, like catalogs, brochures, it's much better to read it on a paper form. If I'm reading it electronically on a laptop, the amount of electricity that I'm going to use to read that is going to be quite high. You got to take into account the time and the fact that that laptop can be closed or the computer can be closed during that time that I'm going to read this whole report or financial report and stuff like that. So anything that's quite thick, I would really recommend you printing it rather than reading it off an electronic form or medium. Even when you talk about books, like most books, if you read it on an iPad, you're going to find that's actually going to take up a lot more in terms of electricity than what's going to be used for printing it. And the good thing about books, catalogs, magazines, and sort like that is it can also be reused. You might not be the only person that would be reading it. If you read it online, you're going to be the only one who's going to be reading it. But if you're printing it out, you can actually share it with other people as well. So it can be reused in that way as well. So really think, what is better for the environment? Think of the whole picture and not just about that particular source only. And what else we've got to consider is things like where that resource consumption is coming from, whether it's from an old growth forest or whether it's a plantation forest, where the paper is coming from. If you're using electricity, where that's coming from as well, whether it's coal, hydroelectric, wind. Like even in Australia, you find the electricity charges in Tasmania, for example, are a lot lower than it is from New South Wales. And that's simply because they use a lot more hydro. Whereas in New South Wales and Victoria, we tend to use a lot of coal and brown coal on top of that, which is really bad for the environment. So the impact of using electricity in these states is even worse than some other states. So figure out, even if you're using electricity, where that source of electricity is coming from and what kind of impact that would make. Transport is very important. A lot of people don't realize the impact of the transport. If I'm just sending it electronically, I do save the impact of the transport side of things. whether it's reusable, whether at the end of it goes to waste, or whether it can be recycled, and think of the whole cradle to grave. Basically, as long as you can think of the whole picture, and not everyone can do that, but have a think about it, and whenever you're using something, think what is the complete cycle of what I'm using, where did it come from, where is it going, and what I do with it. Then you can get a better picture of how it affects the environment as well. Next, I'm going to touch on recycling. Now, recycling 1 ton of paper saves 17 mature trees. And not only that, it actually saves in terms of your landfill, the use of water, bleach, and your emissions as well. So using a recycled paper is one of the best ways to ensure that we're reducing our environmental footprint. Cardboard actually saves a lot more in terms of landfill if you recycle it, at 7 meters cubed, sorry. And we got to try and prevent things from going to a landfill. So whenever we use a recycled product, there are 2 impacts that we're making. One is we're reusing a product which would otherwise go to a landfill, which would be quite bad. And secondly, when we're using a recycled product, we don't have to make a product from scratch as well. And that makes quite a bit of savings as well. In Australia, we're doing a pretty good job in terms of our newspapers, and that's actually largely due to Rupert Murdoch. Hard to believe, but he's actually helped make a whole distribution chain where magazines and newspapers go back to him, and he can use that to basically recycle the paper for his new production. Australia is up there at something like 75% in terms of recycling newspapers and magazines. In terms of the entire paper trail, we still lag behind Europe and even Japan in Asia Pacific. If you look at the chart on the right-hand side, you can see we're slightly ahead of the UK and the US, but countries like Germany, Japan, Switzerland are way ahead of us. The Nordic countries are another good group of countries that really are advanced in terms of their recycling, and we should try and catch up to that. The ways you can help is, even in the office, what we find is not everyone is actually recycling the things that they use. One example that actually worked was in a government department here in Sydney. They removed the waste bins from everyone's desk, and what they did was they put recycle bins at the end of each floor. So people have to actually get up from the desk and go to and sort out their rubbish. You find if you have a waste bin at the bottom of your desk, everything goes into it. You're not going to bother to recycle at all. So a good tip is try and make it such that people have to recycle. It took them a while to adjust, but right now they found the recycling rate just went up, tenfold. When we do recycle, make sure that we're recycling the correct bins. You'll be surprised at the amount of plastic that ends up in the bottle bin, or bottles that end up in the paper bin. And this is something that I discussed with Vizzy, and they said, yeah, it's still happening. Sometimes maybe it's a prank, but sometimes people don't take the effort. And what you find is, if we're not putting in the right bins, we're actually increasing our footprint again, because then what happens is that they have an extra step of sorting things out and making sure it's going to the right place. Now, a few tips before recycling: discard the food remains that can't be recycled. So, like your pizza boxes and stuff like that. Yeah, make sure that all the food is taken out of it. Stamps can be recycled, so you don't have to take the stamps off. Even sticky labels and stuff like that on envelopes, you can basically recycle that. Envelopes with windows, that's fine as well. You can recycle that. What a lot of people don't realize is there's a few things that cannot be recycled. Things like labels. I'm not talking about the labels on envelopes, but rather if you have a whole sheet of labels, those can't be recycled. Tape, adhesives, take those off from the paper. Anything that's added to a book, like the metal, the spirals, all that sort of thing, please take it out first. What you find is a lot of people think paper plates and paper cups can be recycled, when actually it cannot be. Those things have a wax coating on it to help it retain the heat. And because of that wax coating, it's not actually recycled. So it actually stops the process. Now, what happens is that in different countries, you're going to find the recycling process might be slightly different. So this source is basically from Vizzy. So in Australia, what you're going to find is, yeah, paper plates, cups, and boxes can't be recycled with a wax coating, but there might be countries and recycling plants that may be able to do it. So do check and see what the local authorities are saying. Things like paper towels, napkins, tissues definitely can't be recycled. It's towards the end of the recycling cycle. You talk about it. Paper can be recycled 7 times, and these things towards the end of it. The other thing is we use these materials basically to pick up a lot of liquids, and that can't be added to the recycling material either. Photographs, paper clips, also can be recycled. Sticky notes and polystyrene are another examples that VZS found into their paper recycling containers that shouldn't be recycled as well. Now, a lot of people look at environmental initiatives and try and figure out how does that benefit the company. And the thing is, it is a big cost saving that can be had. I mean, if you just follow the tips, that's a 50% cost savings on your paper use, and even on the ink use and stuff like that. What you find is if you increase your sustainability efforts, it also increases the productivity of the staff. So there are processes that you can put in place to help that happen as well. In terms of human resources, there's been quite a few surveys, and what they find is companies that practice more sustainable practices, more ethically sound practices, tend to attract higher retention of staff, and also a lot more applicants for positions as well. 52% of the companies identified employee motivation, the value of the culture and stuff like that as things that encourage lower turnover. So what you're going to find is these kind of CSR opportunities do help the company as well. The other thing is it also can add to the value. A lot of the value in Coca-Cola, American Express, and Kellogg comes from intangible stuff. And what you find is environmental concerns, ethical concerns are up there as well. If you are seen as a company that practices environmental sound practices and ethical practices, your reputation goes up, and that adds to the core value of the company as well. And you find a lot of CEOs would actually value that. And in terms of investment and investors, they do see it as a key component as well. In terms of marketing to your customer base, you find this actually can be a competitive advantage. This survey was done in America, where 79% of Americans take CSR into considering a purchase, and 36% think it is an essential factor. In Australia, about 90% of Australians feel the environment is a very important issue, and they feel organizations should have a good policy towards it. What you find is about 10% of Australians would make it as part of a decision making. And you find most people, if you find two products of similar value in terms of the cost, in terms of the quality, they would pick the more environmentally friendly product. So it can be the differentiator that makes you more competitive as well. So it's something that we all should actually go down the road of. Now, the other part about paper is we can go the extra mile. As I've mentioned before, paper can be a sustainable resource if we treat it like one. Unfortunately, today we don't have enough of that sustainable resource. It's only about 10% of the world's forests that are currently certified or sustainable, either by FSC or PEFC. So we try and help that by going the extra mile and building a positive footprint on the environment. So we plant trees basically as a crop in Australia that we supply back to the paper industry. And what that means is that there's a sustainable cycle that comes about from it. In addition, it helps the Australian farmlands because it's a secondary income, and also it helps as a windbreaker. In Australia, we don't have that practice as yet, and it's slowly coming about that we should have windbreakers on our farms to help the productivity of farms because it actually reduces the topsoil erosion. So this is another way for farmers to benefit from a program like this. And what happens is that every year, every 12 years, we actually harvest these trees and we sell it back to the paper industry. Now, with the money that we get, we actually invest it back into planting more trees. What this means is that you can actually have a positive legacy because every 12 years, you can actually double the number of trees that we have. So if you plant 10 trees today, in 12 years, it becomes 20 trees. In 24 years, it becomes 40 trees and so forth. In 120 years, you get 10,000 trees. So think about the impact that you can make by offsetting the paper that you have as well. That's basically an extra step that you can do to help with that. On top of that, we do have a calculator on the website. Now, you can go on the website and measure your tree use. So if you do know what your consumption of paper is, go in there, put in the figures, and figure out how many trees you're actually using. Now, what the calculator is going to show is basically how many standard Australian blue gum trees will be used for that paper. Roughly, you can get about 32 reams for each blue gum tree. And then you can do an audit on your own as well. If you need help, you can always ask me or drop me a line. But this is something that I would encourage you guys to do on your own. From your finance side or from your supplier side, you can actually find out exactly how much paper the company is using and have it as a measurement tool, how many trees that's needed to actually make that paper, and then give that to the staff as well and figure out, where do they want to go from there. Measure on a per capita basis, and that works out a lot better because sometimes, and most times, companies are trying to increase. So if you're trying to increase in terms of your staff and stuff like that, it's no point just saying, look, this is how much we're using now, and we got to reduce it to that. We should reduce it on a per capita basis, and then you find it's a much better incentive as well. And where we can help out as well is in terms of giving you environmental tips for your websites, your advertising materials. We can assist with PR campaigns, as well as, you can use the logo on whatever that you offset as well. Other things that you can look at as well is things like carbon offset and being carbon neutral, where they look at what kind of carbon impact your usage makes as well. And that takes into account, your operations in the office as well. So do look at offsetting programs and how that can help you become more neutral and hopefully more positive as well in terms of your environmental footprint. Basically, that's it for me. The final message I just want to put out there is, look, whenever you're talking about environmental impact, make sure that it's a positive one, that you're giving back and make it more sustainable. Make sure that you're measuring what you're using and knowing what you're measuring so you know exactly what your impact is, and then have it aligned to your use of resources. If you're talking about offsetting and all that, make sure that you're aligning to the resources that you're using. And finally, these things also give you a competitive advantage, and that's the way to also present it to the management and to the CEOs as well. It's not something that we're just looking at incurring a cost to do something, but there is a competitive advantage you can get out of it. If you can prove that there's sales that come out of it, management usually will support it as well. If you guys got any other questions or need any more information, you can always contact myself or look us up on our website. And that's it for me. I hope you've got something out of this presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Raj. It was very insightful and very thought-provoking presentation. I've got a feeling that all our audience members will be able to implement a lot of the paper reduction recommendations you outlined on today.
Cool.
So we have a number of, what I'm going to ask now is for the audience members, we're going to commence the Q&A portion of our live speaker session. So if you have any questions that you would like to ask Raj about his presentation, his work with 10,000 trees, or his experiences in green IT and sustainable IT, then please feel free to submit your questions now in the questions and chat box in the webinar control panel. What I will do, Raj, is just hand control back to you if I can.
Okay, no worries.
And that way, if you need to refer to your slides, you may do from there.
Okay, cool.
So Raj will be able to address each question in turn. So please remember, if you would like to speak with Raj or a representative of the Foundation for IT Sustainability, please feel free to email info@fits.org at any time following this session, and we'd be more than happy to assist your query following the conclusion of today's session. So now for the user-submitted questions. Okay. So the first question we have for you today, Raj, is what brands of paper then would you recommend for organisations?
Okay, I'll just switch slides here.
Sure.
Yeah, this is something that we can also make available, but the recommended papers here, as you can see, are basically Evolve, Vision, Fuji, and Office Max. Now, this is a list of recommendations that a few environmental groups have come up with. The reason they chose this was, one, it is basically a recycled paper, and secondly, it's also a brand that is not linked to other brands that basically source their paper from unsustainable sources. Unfortunately, in Australia, there's a lot of paper manufacturers here that also might have certain paper stocks that are sustainable, have other paper stocks that are not. And that's why the environmental groups basically looked into these 4 brands out there. So I would recommend using that. Basically, I would also say, look, use recycled paper, use post-consumer waste recycled paper. If you can't use that, then make sure it is either FSC or PEFC certified.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Raj. The next question is, with electronic mediums becoming ever more popular, why is paper use increasing on a per capita basis?
What we're finding in terms of paper use is there's a lot more electronic medium out there, and that's true, and we're using the different mediums more, but we're also shifting how we use our paper. What you're going to find is if you compare what we have today to 20 years before or 50 years before, printers are not as readily available. Now you find every house, every office has a printer. So what tends to happen is instead of it being printed at a certain point, it gets distributed electronically and people print it out wherever they are. Now the second thing is, when we talk about the electronic world, there's a lot more devices out there. But whenever you have a new device, you also find there's a lot more things that come with it. Things like the operating manual, the warranties, the paperwork that goes with it. So we are, as a nation, using a lot more resources. And whenever we use a lot more resources, be it more devices or whatever, there's a lot more paperwork that comes along with it as well. And the third reason is because of a lot of direct marketing that's going out. You find direct marketing is a very effective tool for getting sales. And as your population increases, there's a lot more direct marketing and sometimes a lot of junk mail that goes out to a lot more of the population. And all that tends to start increasing the amount of paper that we use.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question we have is there enough sustainable forest for our current use of paper?
The short answer to that is no. We're still in a net deforestation of something like 8 million hectares per year, but we're slowly getting towards it. What you're going to find is that in terms of sustainable paper, if you talk to your printers, most printers are actually using sustainable paper. Most of them will be FSC certified or PEFC certified or have some sort of certification where it is coming from sustainable forestry. Especially in Australia, what you'll find is the majority of paper here is sustainable for the printing industry. In terms of copy paper, a lot of it is still coming from unsustainable forestry. If you go to most places, you find a lot of the sources might come from places like Indonesia or South America or in Southeast Asia, where certifications are not in place as yet, and a lot of it is they're deforesting places where the wildlife is being affected as well. So be careful of where it comes from, and if it's coming from places in Asia and South America, then make sure to have the certification, because that should trigger in your mind that it might be coming from an unsustainable source. And the problem with these two blocks of land is that these are old-growth forests that have been around for hundreds of years, and there's a lot of wildlife in these forests as well. So we really got to make sure that we're sourcing from the right places. And if we use sustainably sourced paper and have the demand of that going up, what you're going to find is that then more people will be planting sustainable forests and not touching the old growth forest as well. So the short answer is no, but the long answer is if we do the right things, then we will have enough sustainable forests for the future.
Raj, what recommendations would you make for organisations who wish to implement paperless offices?
Look, the whole thing about paperless offices right now is kind of a fairy tale. I don't think there's any office that can say they're completely paperless. But if you're going to go into the paperless office space, the whole cycle of paper has got to be looked at. Like I said, sometimes the electronic means is better, but sometimes the paper means is better. So just because you're going electronic doesn't mean you're doing the right thing by the whole environment. You might be doing the right thing for paper, but not for the whole environment. So take into consideration the entire cycle of what you're doing before you decide on a paperless office as well. Because sometimes it is actually better to print.
Okay, thank you. We've got another question here from an audience member. What are the benefits of using print chargeback services in terms of energy efficiency and the environment?
Okay, I'm not sure of print chargeback services. Could they elaborate on that?
I'll get them to drop a little bit of clarification into my text box, and we'll move on to the next question then in the meantime.
Yep.
If a business's recycling is contaminated, as you mentioned, by paper plates or food-covered pizza boxes, does that result in the whole recycling bin's contents being discarded from the process?
No, it won't be discarded. What happens is that it goes into the recycling plant, and then what they have to do is sort it out. So there's a sorting cycle that they go through, and the more of that they're going to find, then your environmental footprint gets a bit bigger. But no, everything still goes to the recycling plant. Like I said, sometimes even what they find is bottles and non-paper products in a paper bin. All it does is they sort it out and make sure that the right thing is going into the paper side of things. So it's just an additional step that's happening because of that.
Okay, thank you, Raj. How can staff best approach their management team about reducing paper consumption in either their department or their overall office environment?
The best way to approach management is actually from a cost-saving perspective. If you're going to reduce the amount of paper that you're using in the office, you are going to reduce the cost of that paper. The other thing that you're going to do is whenever you look at how we can improve the use of resources in an office, you're also looking at the productivity of the processes that we're using currently. So the two aspects of that is, one, you increase the productivity. Two, you look at it as a cost-saving measure, not just on paper, but everything else that you're using. So when you do go to management, think of it as how can I become more productive and how can I reduce all the resources that I'm using. To management, that is key. If I can increase productivity and cost and reduce my cost, it is a win-win situation.
Okay, thank you, Raj. We have received a clarification from that previous question, actually. So when they're discussing the print charge rate, I think they're referring to managed print services where they'll outsource their printing using hard copy device fleets in terms of what use that has in terms of reducing paper consumption and energy, increasing energy efficiency in businesses.
Actually, what we found is that whenever you do use outsourced managed services to do your printing, it is actually more efficient. Most companies don't have expertise in terms of printing. So if you're outsourcing it to a printer to do it, what you're going to find is they know exactly what's needed for different print jobs, what kind of color specifications. So your print job actually gets better. And on top of that, they specialize in printing. So their whole process is around just printing. So the efficiencies that you can get out of that process is a lot higher. And I'm not sure about other countries, but in Australia, most printers are following really high environmental standards. And because of that, you're going to find the efficiencies and getting rid of cost is also a lot better than actually doing it in-house. There is research out there that shows it benefits the company in multiple ways. One, in terms of the environment, and two, in terms of the cost as well. Because if you're going to have a printer in-house for that sort of printing, your cost efficiencies are going to be quite high as well. Unless you're doing a lot of printing, then it might be a case where you have your own management of it. But if you're not someone that does a lot of printing, it's a lot better to outsource it.
Thank you, Raj. So I'll just ask a question now to the audience. If you do have any final questions that you would like Rajkumar to address in this live session, please input them now into the GoToWebinar control panel on your screen. This will be the last chance to ask those, but do know that following the presentation, if you do have any further questions, feel free to email them to us at info@bits.org or directly to Rajkumar himself, and he'd be happy to address and assist with any query following today's presentation. So we'll just wait for any final questions to come through. Okay, I think that's all the questions for today. Thank you very much for that, Raj.
No worries.
We'll end our webinar session for now. So thank you very much, as I mentioned, for your time and certainly for your willingness to share your information and your expertise on paper reduction and consumption. Also, thank you to all who have participated in today's session. We're glad you could join us and hope the session was very helpful for you. Just a reminder to all that a recording of this session will be made available within 24 hours via the Green IT Week virtual conference webinar page. So again, thank you very much, Raj, for joining us. We really appreciate your time. Did you have any closing remarks or comments?
No, not really. I just hope that everyone got something out of it. And yeah, if anyone needs any help, I'm quite happy to do so.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again. We really do appreciate your time, Raj, and we hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day and look forward to seeing you at future sessions hosted throughout the rest of International Green IT Awareness Week.